and thank you for joining us today. It's with great pleasure that I introduce our two legislative advocates, David Walrath and Jennifer Baker. CalRTA has been privileged to have David Walrath with us since 1983. And recently in 2019, Jennifer Baker joined us as one of our advocates. If you have any questions during this session, please type it in the chat box. If we are unable to answer these during this session, please join us Friday at 11:15 during our armchair advocacy. This session is being recorded and will be on the CalRTA website in a few weeks. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Dave Walrath. I will be starting this presentation on legislative and budget update of federal and state activities. Jennifer will then follow my presentation. I will be doing federal, she will be doing state. So next slide. We will be covering the stimulus actions, what's happening in Social Security, Medicare, state budget. I assume most of you have been seeing all the media coverage of the state budget and the unanticipated state surplus, state legislation, and what are some of the timelines that are affecting how legislation will be dealt with and how the budget will be dealt with. So on federal stimulus, the CARES Act. This was the act that was in March of 2020, the first major stimulus package that was adopted by Congress and signed by the president. It was followed by a modified program in December of 2020, and then the American Rescue Plan, which has been enacted in 2021. And then there are proposals, the American Jobs Plan. The CARES Act had a number of provisions, one of which was the stimulus check, which helped a number of seniors, and I hope a number of our retired members. It went to individuals with income of less than $75,000. And I know Jennifer and I are supposed to make sure all of you have incomes greater than $75,000, but we haven't succeeded in that for everybody yet. So that was a major part of the CARES Act, as well as some funding for different business purposes in order to keep businesses open and people employed. The American Rescue Plan, like I say, is the most recent that was signed. It has a number of provisions that should help our members. For example, there's another stimulus check, the money for the Older Americans Act programs, trying to ensure that there's access to counseling and support. That's about $1.4 billion. The Elder Justice Act, one of the great fears and concerns has been that some of the people who prey on seniors have tried to use the pandemic as cover for scams that will harm seniors. This act is trying to provide prosecutors and others money in order to stop the scams and convict those who are committing the scams. Then $1.5 million for community mental health. Being alone has had significant mental health issues. The $7.6 billion for community health centers. This is part of the effort to move or at least help seniors stay in their own home and not go to nursing homes, or if they are in a nursing home but can live independently with a little assistance, to move out of the nursing home and back to another living arrangement that provides them more freedom of action and more opportunity, similar to all the other efforts to help people stay at home. The COVID pandemic really hurt seniors in nursing homes. The death rate, the illness rate was more than 50% of those who were over 65 who died or were in serious situation were those over 65 in nursing homes. Trying to look at other ways to protect the health, and both physical and mental, for seniors. Then there's public health workforce. We need people in that workforce, the healthcare workforce. Then the American Jobs Plan, which is a new proposal. It is primarily for families and people currently in the workforce. However, there are some provisions, once again, home and community-based care, expansion, community health centers and hospitals, and for the schools, public education, funding to modernize and build new and more appropriate school facilities. The president, in his budget proposal, has made a almost 41% proposal to increase funding for Department of Education and for K-12 and community colleges. For the K-12 side, increase in Title I grants, increases about $2.5 billion increase for Special Education, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, a number of other proposals, early childhood education. You can read through this list on what the proposals are, but it making a serious commitment to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as well as other provisions in order to ensure an improved educational access and programs for students. On the student side, the American Rescue Plan had significant money in it to encourage school districts for summer school, after school, maybe other types of learning in order to address the learning loss that has occurred during the pandemic. The next slide, please. The American Families Plan, you're seeing this and what's in there on schools, K-12 and community college. Another commitment for education in addition to the commitments that have been made in the rescue plan. Once again, I won't go through all of this, but the proposing doubling of teacher scholarships. We have a serious problem with the number of teachers who are being trained to become teachers. We don't have enough, and this will hopefully help increase the pipeline so we will have enough individuals who will become the teachers of the future for our students. High needs areas, childcare, a number of other proposals. But once again, on a lot of this is for families and current workers. And part of the motivation is to also ensure that children are not in poverty, that families are in better financial shape, which will help our schools in educating our students. Next plan. Social Security. 3 bills we want to touch on. HR 82. I hope you have been getting the alerts. I hope you've been sending the messages to Congress, both California delegation. We have right now 33 Californians who've co-sponsored HR 82. There are 53 California members of the House, so we need 20 more to complete all 53. Please continue The Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday alerts and contacts. We're at 142 co-sponsors. We had 168 for last year's HR 141. That was an excellent number. We need to get to 290. 290 co-sponsors guarantees us a vote on the House floor. We want a vote. We want to have the representatives be accountable for supporting and repealing these penalties, the windfall elimination provision and government pension offset. Senate Bill 1302 repeals the windfall elimination provision, government pension offset. It is the Senate version of HR 82. Each House of Representatives, United States Senate, introduces their own legislation. So this is the vehicle in this United States Senate. It already has 28 co-sponsors, and I'm pleased to announce that one of our senators, Senator Dianne Feinstein, has already co-sponsored. We'll be asking you to contact Senator Padilla and urge him to co-sponsor as well. These are pure repeal bills. HR 2337 by Chairman Neal. He is the chair of the Ways and Means Committee in the House. It would eliminate the windfall elimination provision, but does create another way of calculating the penalty. The penalty is much less under HR 2337, and retirees would receive $150 a month, but they would still have a loss of some of their earned Social Security, even under 2337, just not as big of a loss. Our concern is it does not include the government pension offset. The government pension offset is when many of our members whose spouse was a Social Security earner, when that spouse dies, normally the beneficiary, the survivor, receives that full Social Security payment. The general government pension offset reduces that survivor benefit and can reduce it down to zero. We believe this is a penalty that so seriously harms the retirement security of our members that it too needs to be in the bill. And we have alerts asking you to encourage our members in the House of Representatives to ask Chairman Neal to include the government pension offset. Under Medicare, HR 480 by Katie Porter of California. There are penalties for late enrollment in Medicare Part B. And those penalties can be significant and can last for your whole time in Medicare. HR 480 reduces the penalties and caps the penalties so they don't continue. So it's lesser penalty for lesser time for the individuals who, for whatever reason, enrolled late. And it's easy to do, particularly if you're under a school district plan or you've bought into the school district plan. It's easy to not enroll in Medicare at the time when it's important to enroll. We are always hearing rumors of Medicare reform later this year or next year. Unfortunately, most of the time we hear a rumor of Medicare reform. It is not reform from our point of view. Instead, it's a benefit cut. We are hoping that instead of this, we will see Medicare reform that expands the types of services that are available under Medicare Part A and Part B. We are hopeful those discussions are happening, and this is a true reform. Whether it happens or not, there's been discussion that it will be in the next budget reconciliation bill, but that is unclear at this time. We'll definitely keep you informed of what is happening with Medicare, because it is so important for your healthcare security. Next slide. And with this slide, I'm now pleased to turn it over to Jennifer Baker to go through the state budget and the state budget implications for Calstrs and members of CalRTA.
Thank you so much, Dave. And thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. I have a lot of information that I'm also going to be going through, and much of this is going to be very technical, especially on some of the bills. So I again wanted to reiterate what Susie already noted earlier, is that if we're not able to get to all questions, don't forget to pop in for the Armchair Advocacy on Friday, so we can help to answer all of the questions that you might ask. But let me start with the state budget and some good news. We don't always have good news to share. So let me start out with saying that the governor made an announcement earlier this week after it's finalized all of its calculations and projections. California has over $75 billion surplus right now. That's a very good problem to have. And this is going to be coupled with over $25 billion additional federal stimulus funds that California is going to be receiving. So there's a whole over $100 billion to work with. It doesn't mean it's going to be able to go into all sectors of the budget, but it certainly does change the kind of conversation that we were looking at last year and even earlier this year. So let me predicate that, because that's going to shift up some of the discussions that we're going to be having. The first thing I wanted to note was Calstrs, because that's really your bread and butter. That gives you your primary financial security through Calstrs. And the state had skipped a state contribution payment in the past in one of the previous budgets to help the state save a little funding when it was short. And what the governor's budget this year does is it would bring the state back up to the contribution rate that they should have been. And then in addition to that, when the state didn't make that payment, it also created a little gap that the state is also proposing to shore up as well. So CalRTA did communicate our support for the governor's budget in regard to Calstrs this year. We're looking forward to the May revision that's going to be released on Friday, potentially Thursday, but most likely Friday. And we're looking forward to seeing where those conversations will go to ensure that Calstrs is in a very strong financial situation. We have been hearing discussions last year, this year, and we'll continue to hear discussions regarding employer contribution rates. As many of you may remember, the governor in a few budgets ago had reduced the total amount of employer contribution rates that school and community college districts were giving to Calstrs. That was able to give school and community college districts additional financial flexibility, and that additional contribution payment does stop in the year 22-23. So folks are bracing for those contribution rates to go back up to what they would have been. We're paying attention to the kinds of discussions that are taking place at Sacramento and at Calstrs to try to assess, is this something that we might hear rumors about continuing, or are we likely to see employers just going back up to where they would have been, and then Calstrs setting the rates that were created in AB 1469, which was the full funding legislation. But that is likely going to be one of the larger discussions when it comes to Calstrs, because that absolutely can have an impact on long-term funding, especially if we don't hear conversations about contribution rates, but perhaps we might hear conversations about an additional state payment or an additional payment for school and community college employers to use towards the addressing their share of the Calstrs unfunded obligations. So we have been participating in conversations related to keeping Calstrs on the right track towards full funding. by 2046. And I just wanted to let you know that we're going to continue to do that. We don't know if there'll be anything included in Friday's May revision, but if there is not, if there are conversations for next year, we're definitely going to participate in those conversations. Just to give a perspective, and we did have some increased numbers from Calstrs recently, but if we were to see a 1% employer contribution buy down for the year 22-23, the cost would be around $370 million. So if we were looking at a 2-year contribution buy down, obviously we're looking at about $740 million. So we're not talking about a small chunk of change, but anything that can have a significant impact on those numbers is something we're going to be paying attention to. Something of note that it's not budget related, but yet it can be, and that's the issue of teacher retirements. In December, Calstrs had reported that they've seen a 26% increase in the number of teachers that were retiring. And this is in December, which is mid-year. That's not something they typically see. Most teachers would tend to retire after the school year had finished. So the fact that we saw that type of a trend was something that really caught everyone's attention. The reason it's really important to note is that if school districts don't replace those teachers that are retiring, because they might be thinking, let's save some money by not replacing those teachers, it's actually counterintuitive, because if employers don't fill in that gap, then you have too many retirees and not enough active teachers paying into Calstrs, which means that the Teachers Retirement Board could potentially have to increase district contribution rates in the future to offset that imbalance. And that contribution rate increase could potentially cost districts even more than they would have saved. So there are a number of new complicated conversations that school districts haven't had to consider before that could have an impact on how they're going to be dealing with their current and future budgets. So we're also paying attention to some of those external factors to see if they may come into play in any way at the state level. But the good news is that on Friday, we're going to find out many more of the details from the governor's May revision, specifically his plan to give back a significant portion of the additional revenue to Californians who are earning $75,000 or less. One of the early provisions that the governor did share in a press conference earlier this week was that he's going to be providing stimulus checks essentially to individuals or families that are making $75,000 or less, and they would get anywhere from a $500 to $600 check. There would also be something additional for individuals that have children, and there are a number of other provisions that the governor is planning on releasing that would impact utilities, water, trying to provide additional financial resources for individuals with rent because of the pandemic and the complicated situation that a number of individuals have been faced with due to the pandemic. The governor has been promoting a number of ways to try to soften that blow or help families, but we're not going to see all the specifics until Friday. So make sure that you pay attention for updates that we're going to be providing, most likely late Friday afternoon. So with that, I did want to go into specific legislation. I'm not going to be able to go into the details of all of the bills, but I did want to let you know that we do have information on all of the bills, including our bill letters on the CalRTA website if you go to the Advocacy Action section. But there were some key bills that I did want to highlight. The first is Assembly Joint Resolution 9 by Assemblymember Cooper. And this is a very important resolution that would encourage Congress to pass and the president to sign the repeal of the WEP and the GPO. CalRTA is the sponsor of this resolution. It is on the Assembly floor and is likely to be taken up in the next week or two. We've been working with a number of stakeholders, and my understanding is that the Teachers Retirement Board is also going to be considering taking a support position on this at their June meeting. The second retirement bill I wanted to know is something that we're supporting, which is a Calstrs sponsored bill, AB 551 by Assemblymember Rodriguez. This would authorize Calstrs to have the ability to offer a traditional IRA in addition to a Roth IRA. And this could be beneficial for retirees because you would be able to roll over funds, and your spouses would also be able to contribute to a plan. So if you wanted to consider rolling some things over or using Calstrs as your primary mechanism, you would have that option if you felt that was the best thing for you. So we have been supporting this bill, which is now in the Assembly, it's going to the Assembly floor. So we're looking forward to seeing that continuing to move forward. But I did want to know a few bills that we're opposing, and a number of these are extremely complicated and have led to a number of discussions that we've really had to chew on in a number of ways. The first one is AB 1019 by Assemblymember Holden. And there have been similar versions of this bill in the past. And what it would do is have Calstrs and CalPERS divest in any investments they have with the country of Turkey due to their lack of acknowledgement of the Armenian genocide. And so we do have an opposed position on this, but I do want to know it's got nothing to do with the Turkey or their position on the Armenian genocide, which was absolutely horrendous. But what is important to know is that when the legislature introduces divestment bills, what they're really doing is they're specifically taxing your retirement security. They're not proposing that the 2% pay for it. They're not proposing that corporate America pay for it. They're not even proposing that all taxpayers share in a small portion of that cost. They're only targeting teachers and public employees when they introduce divestment bills. And what is very complicated about this is that there is not a willingness to talk about who's going to pay for it and the impact that it will have. And we absolutely understand that a number of divestment bills have very sensitive political or social issues that they're trying to address, which absolutely need to be discussed. But in that, you also have to discuss the long-term impact it's going to have on whoever is going to pay for it. What we have been trying to get the legislature to do is acknowledge that there is a cost, even if it's minimal, for certain bills, and you have to consider the long-term cost to Calstrs. For some of these bills, specifically SB 457 by Senator Portantino, this is not only a divestment bill, this would completely restructure Calstrs' investment division by allowing every single school and community college district to independently decide whether or not they want to have Calstrs investments with the government of Turkey. So think about 2,000 plus different retirement funds, not just one retirement fund. Calstrs is now no longer going to be able to make the kind of investment decisions that they used to because you no longer have one fund. It's almost like it's not even a single retirement plan anymore. You now have 2,000, which means it could impact whether or not Calstrs is able to assume the same rate of return. If Calstrs had to lower the rate of return that they have, that means that school districts and community college districts are going to have to pay higher contribution rates. Our members who were hired after 2014 would also likely have to pay higher contribution rates if the normal cost of retirement increases. Costs to the state are also an issue that would come into play. The administrative costs alone for SB 457, Calstrs has informed us that it could be potentially in the hundreds of millions, potentially even reaching $1 billion solely to administer SB 457, because you're now looking at over 2,000 different plans. And you also have to consider, once you open up that door for one issue, depending on what part of the state and what issues are being pushed, you could have school and community college districts that are now being asked to Calstrs to divest in fossil fuels, family farms. We have had dozens of different issues that individuals have wanted to ask Calstrs to divest in. There have been groups that have called for Calstrs to divest in China. If Calstrs were to divest in all of those issue areas anymore, you could potentially not have a Calstrs. And so we have to make some very complicated decisions and have very difficult conversations, because we want to make sure Calstrs is still there for you and you don't have to worry about the security of your retirement check being sent to you every month. And so we have been communicating the fact that the legislature could use their own funds to address any costs associated with bills and protect Calstrs from any financial harm. The state has over $75 billion in extra revenue. Why should teachers have to pay with their retirement security on issues that the state could easily pay for? So for us, it's an issue of cost and wanting to ensure that Calstrs is going to be able to not only be there for you, but to also be there for future retirees. But as you can imagine, these are not easy conversations, and we certainly don't take them lightly. And we have been asking for your participation. Thank you very much for those of you that participated when we sent out legislative alerts. It is very likely we may be sending out more legislative alerts in regard to SB 457 in the next few weeks to few months. And I would certainly ask that if you're able to pick up the phone and call your legislator when we ask you to, we could certainly use that support. I did want to briefly cover a few specific healthcare bills. We have a number of bills in regarding to healthcare and healthy aging legislation that CalRTA is supporting. And I do want to let you know, we have seen a significant increase in the overall number of healthcare related bills that have been introduced in the legislature, specifically those that would impact our senior populations. And much of this has been due to the fact that the COVID pandemic really illustrated the cracks in the sidewalk and cracks in the system that we've seen in our healthcare system. So as a result of that, legislators have been trying to shore up some of the more immediate needs that need to be addressed. And that leads me to actually focusing on the first bill, AB 279 by Assemblymember Marasucci that CalRTA supports. What Assemblymember Marasucci discovered is that during the pandemic, there were a number of healthcare facilities and skilled nursing facilities that were not able to provide for the individuals that were in those facilities. Some simply picked up shop and left. Some were failing to provide the necessary services that an individual needed, or they would not transfer an individual out of that facility or bring someone in order to protect them from a COVID outbreak. There were simply a number of very tragic and very devastating situations that took place, particularly in the early parts of the pandemic. And so what AB 279 would do is try to address a number of the protections that our seniors would need to ensure that should there be an additional pandemic or some type of emergency, that individuals would be able to have the care that they need to. So for example, if the owner were to file bankruptcy, that the individuals in that facility would be notified. We had situations where the healthcare facility declared bankruptcy, and suddenly the next week, individuals were being told, you need to leave, with no advance notice, no place to go in the middle of a pandemic. And so this bill is attempting to try to ensure that that kind of situation never has to happen to another individual in our state again. So that bill is now on the Assembly floor. We've been supporting it moving forward. In relation to skilled nursing facilities, we also have a support position on AB 323 by Assemblymember CalRTA. And what this is doing is creating stronger protections for either a skilled nursing facility or an intermediate care facility. And so what they're doing is they're ramping up the different violations and what's included. If there is a violation regarding the death of a resident in a skilled nursing facility or intermediate care facility. So essentially, it's significantly increasing the penalties that could happen against the owners and operators of those facilities to try to deter any type of actions that would lead to harm or even the death of a resident in those facilities. And unfortunately, it's because California's facilities have not all stepped up to the plate the way they needed to during this pandemic. So the legislature is trying to do what they can to try to force that industry to correct because they didn't self-correct quickly enough. One of the other bills that I wanted to highlight, AB 523 by Assemblymember Nazarian, requires the Department of Healthcare Services to make some of the existing flexibilities that were created in response to the pandemic to make those permanent. California had found that in the initial few months of the pandemic, there's a program, the California Program for All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly, which is also known as the PACE program. There were a number of changes that they had been making, creating flexibilities to ensure that individuals were able to receive telehealth, that they were able to more easily access enrollment agreements, could get adult daycare services provided much more easily than they would have been otherwise to achieve those services in a home. So there were a number of flexibilities that were created in these programs that actually led to better service and better outcome for our seniors. And what this legislation would be to make those flexibilities permanent so we can try to find more efficiencies in our system. So continue the practices and programs that work and to correct the programs that need to be corrected. I'm not going to be able to go over every single one of these bills since we simply have so many, but what I did want to note was that we are supporting a number of bills that have been introduced within the legislature. You can find all of the information on all of the bills, including a copy of the actual bill in our communication to the legislature on those bills on the CalRTA website. But what we wanted to do is really give you a snapshot for the scope of the bills that we're dealing with. We have even more healthcare bills. There are simply quite a number of bills, and most of the healthcare bills are dealing with skilled nursing facilities, nursing homes, geriatric medicine. For those of you that participated in the Master Plan on Aging workshop, take a look at SB 441 by Senator Hurtado, because this is part of the bill package that's directly related to the Master Plan on Aging by adding geriatric medicine to the list of primary care specialties that you can receive. So we're actually seeing the legislature already begin to take the bull by the horns to introduce legislation that would make the Master Plan on Aging take place. But as you can imagine, it is keeping us a little busy in Sacramento these days. Even though we're working from home, we've been able to accomplish quite a bit when it comes to legislation. But I also wanted to note some timelines just so you're aware of some of the issues that we're going to be dealing with over the next few months, so you know what to anticipate. So this Friday, the governor is going to be releasing the May revision. Some of us are trying to make bets to see, is it possible that he might do it on Thursday? But realistically, what we're hearing is it's most likely going to be on Friday. But that we would see the May revision released. And what that means is in Sacramento, we go into overdrive from the time that the May revision is released until June 15th. So there will be a series of budget hearings in the legislature to chew on all of the components of the May revise. I did want to note that both the Senate Budget Chair Nancy Skinner and Assembly Member Phil Ting, who's the chair of the Assembly Budget Committee, had also joined the governor earlier this week at the press conference that he had had announcing a number of proposals that he was going to introduce, and they were extremely complimentary. And so that's really a political signal that the Assembly and the Senate is already beginning to align with the governor on a number of components that are going to be included in the May revise. But that's only part of the May revision. And so we're going to have to look at what the details are going to be for education, for pensions, for a number of economic issues. So please make sure that you're paying attention to what we're going to include on the CalRTA website on that, because we do include up to the date information on Friday. We'll have an update when that comes out. And then the legislature has until June 15th is their constitutional deadline that they have to pass a budget. And they have been meeting that deadline ever since they're not allowed to get paid anymore if they don't pass that. They've suddenly were able to be very productive in that regard. But there are often additional trailer bills that don't have to be passed by the June 15th deadline that we sometimes see passed either in July or August or before the legislative session ends. September 10th is the last day of the current year for this legislative session, and all bills have to be passed by September 10th. And then the governor will have until October 10th to sign or veto those bills. So I'm absolutely certain it's going to be a busy summer and it's going to be a busy fall. And to make it even more busy and exciting, I'm sure you have most likely all heard about the recall that's now taking place for the governor. And at the time I put the slideshow together, it was a potential recall, but it is now an official recall that's taking place. And we don't know the specific date that that's going to actually take place, but it's probably going to be in November, but legally there is the potential that it could happen anytime between mid-September to even early January of next year. So we should be getting the final dates of when that recall is going to be taking place in the next, hopefully month or two. I'm sure that you can already surmise it is definitely having an impact of the kind of discussions and proposals that are taking place in Sacramento. It now feels like Sacramento is really going into a campaign season. And so it's going to be interesting to see politically and fiscally how that may or may not influence some of the proposals, either from legislation or even budget discussions that we're going to be hearing in Sacramento over the next coming weeks and coming months. But what I can let you know is that Dave and I are going to be participating in a myriad of discussions in Sacramento to make sure that we're monitoring discussions and to ensure that we're chiming in as necessary to make sure that your priorities are achieved when it comes to both legislation and the budget. So we're going to have quite a busy 2021. And we know that there are a lot of issues that you might have questions on. So we wanted to make sure that there was some time to answer some questions that you might have. So Dave, here's a question that we've got from Gail. Are the Medicare penalties for working teachers who did not initially enroll in Medicare? Are there penalties for teachers who didn't initially enroll in Medicare? And you kind of touched it with the Porter bill, but would you like to expand?
Right. Let me try to expand a little bit. Everybody is supposed to enroll for Medicare within about 90 days of your eligible date. And so let's say July 1 is your 65th birthday. Under the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, they want you to enroll on April 1, by April 1 to July 1. They want you to enroll early because essentially your benefits start when you turn 65. And so they need to have everything in line for your participation. The penalties are somewhat flexible in some ways. And the Porter bill is dealing with a piece of it. The other is just under Medicare Part D, the prescription drug. That is, if you are covered by a comparable prescription drug plan, there is no penalty for late enrollment in that. If you're not, then yes, there is a penalty. And that's similar to some of the things regarding healthcare, hospital, and like that. So if you're fully covered, you're not as subject, but we would still say enroll. Just so you're online, because Medicare doesn't cover everything. Your existing plan probably doesn't cover everything. So there may be some overlap that would be worthwhile for you. And then lastly, is it possible to end up with penalties if you are a working educator, if you don't have a healthcare plan, or if you're taking a break and you're not actively an employee? There is the possibility that you do have that penalty coming in on you if you do not enroll within a timely manner.
We've got another question. Pamela asked, does Calstrs have many investment vehicles owned by Turkey? I did have a conversation with Calstrs about this, and what they noted is that overall, both direct or indirect, and they're primarily indirect investments, they only have about $15 million that would be directly impacted. So initially, many individuals say, well, then what's the problem? It's not a lot of money. We also have to think of the long-term opportunity costs, and it doesn't mean that Calstrs is going to go invest in Turkey in the future, but the world is a lot smaller. And so while the cost today might be 15 million, the cost tomorrow could be 50 million or $100 million. It's really hard to speculate. But if the cost is small, then the question that I would throw out is, then why can't the state pay for it? Because the next issue that that people may ask Calstrs to divest in may not only cost $15 million, it could cost $15 billion. And so when that would have a significant impact on the contribution rates, retirement security, how high do the costs need to be for that discussion to take place? And that's it's a difficult discussion. It's easy to make a decision when you don't have to pay for the cost, but what we're having to think about in the long run, when all of these divestment issues are over, you're still here and Calstrs is still here. So how can we ensure that after all of this is over, your retirement security is still going to be intact?
We have lots more questions. I'm not sure if we're going to be allowed to stay on in order to answer them. As the question regarding Kevin Brady putting in a partial repeal of the WEP, Representative Brady has indicated he is not going to run for re-election. We believe that is the reason why he has not introduced his WEP windfall elimination provision bill that he had introduced in the last 3 Congresses. So he'll be probably becoming engaged with the Chair Neal's bill, as there are discussions if the Chair's bill does come up for a discussion.
Dr. Keaton asked a very astute question about, and this is in regard to SB 457, the Portantino divestment and change in Calstrs investment plan. And the question is, if the bill passes, letting districts choose, is it the district's bucket that divests? Are they held, essentially, are they held accountable if there is a loss of funds? So to help to explain the issue, let's say I used to be a trustee in Natomas in the Sacramento area, and let's say that our board said we want to have Calstrs divest. If that actually lost money in the district next door or across the state didn't make that decision, if there's a loss, who's responsible for that loss? Is it just Natomas? So is the Natomas Unified District going to have to actually pay a higher contribution rate than it would have otherwise? Or do the losses get pushed across the state so all districts are now going to have to cover the loss from a decision that was made from one district? And the problem is, we don't know because nothing like this has been done before. And when the bill was introduced, there was not the contemplation that that's not how Calstrs works. It's not all of the districts that make these decisions. It's only one investment decision, which is why we're worried, because it would literally restructure how Calstrs works, which could jeopardize their long-term retirement security.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I have been taking notes on the additional questions that we have run out of time to answer. So we will deal with them at our armchair advocacy session on Friday. And we just want to thank everyone again for joining us today. And hopefully you've learned a lot and we'll come with more questions.
And thank you for your participation. We do have answers for your questions. We just don't have time.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes day one. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.